Okay, with great pleasure. Joining me now is great friend, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, who is also a Fox News contributor. Newt, great to see you. Great to see you this past weekend, you and Ambassador Callista. So, Newt, there's a million things to talk about, and I probably wasn't going to do this, but I'm reading all this stuff about Iran. My opening intro was about Iran. It is inconceivable to me that they would be pushing for an Iranian deal, giving a Russian construction company a $10 billion carve-out to build a nuclear plant of some kind, on top of $11 billion for high. I mean, Newt, the whole thing is just inconceivable to me. I need help to understand this.
Well, it shouldn't be inconceivable. You're old enough. You remember Jimmy Carter. Just assume that Biden is Jimmy Carter without ever going to Annapolis to the Naval Academy and without ever being a nuclear engineer. And then assume that Biden is surrounded by people who are a generation nuttier than the people who are around Carter. And you begin to sense what's going on. Look, I think Andy McCarthy's column this morning, where he outlined the total dishonesty of the Biden administration, which is apparently promising the Russians a whole series of deals as long as the Russians help deliver the right kind of Iranian agreement. And remember, there are people in the Biden administration who see Iran as the counterweight to Israel. They really see this as an opportunity to shrink Israel's influence, to weaken Israel. And I think that we underestimate how deeply the anti-Israeli feeling is inside the Biden administration. Then add to that some strange fascination with Putin. I mean, despite the words, and I have a newsletter coming out tomorrow that outlines the difference between Zelensky's speech and Biden's speech, it is pathetic. As an American, I'm ashamed that we have a government that is this unwilling to be helpful to a free people who are fighting to survive against a war. Even Biden has called him a war criminal. But of course, when Biden doesn't mean anything by it, that's just words to get through a news conference. But Putin is a war criminal, and we ought to be dealing with him as a war criminal.
You know, he won't take a whack at him in all of his speeches. I mentioned this last evening. I mean, Reagan coined the evil empire. All right, Reagan said, we win, you lose. Reagan said, tear down this wall. Biden says nothing. Biden's afraid to take him on rhetorically. I mean, when Zelensky asked Biden to be the leader of the free world and so forth, he was prodding him, it seems to me. But we don't get it. And Newt, let me just go back. What is this? This is some left-wing hatred of Israel, isn't it? That's buried in the so-called progressive wing of the Democratic Party.
Absolutely. There's a deep feeling that Israel's too strong, too arrogant, too Jewish, to be honest, and that therefore you have to do something to shrink its power. And the people in charge of this negotiation have consistently, for a decade, been anti-Israel and been in favor of trying to strengthen Iran as a way of balancing off Israel, which, frankly, is an invitation to a major war in the Middle East. I mean, I think people really underestimate how dangerous this is. And remember, this is an Iranian dictatorship, which even the Biden State Department says is the leading sponsor of terrorism in the world. It's a group of people who actively have assassins in the United States trying to kill people like Mike Pompeo and Robert O'Brien, who you just had on a few minutes ago. And it's a dictatorship which just fired rockets very close to the American consulate in Iraq. The idea that you have a combination of Russia in the middle of trying to conquer Ukraine and Iran while it's trying to terrorize the world, that's the team Biden likes. And I agree a lot with Rick Perry. Biden doesn't like anything about Texas oil or Oklahoma oil or North Dakota oil. But boy, give him a chance to buy oil from dictators, and suddenly he feels good. This is the strangest and most destructive American presidency, certainly in my lifetime, and maybe for a century.
Yeah, I think that's right. So let me just switch gears. Biden will blame Putin, pandemics, supply chains. He'll blame everybody for inflation rather than your phrase, big government socialism, which is really the root cause of this thing. too much stimulus, too much deficit spending, and plenty of welfare, but no work requirements. I mean, he won't face up to that either.
Well, he can't face up to it. Look, you're dealing with people who are close to a religious group. Theodore White warned back in 1972 that ideology was becoming actually theology, and that all of a sudden you had people who you couldn't negotiate with because you'd be violating their religious belief system. And that's what you've got. You know, Biden made a speech 3 nights ago to the Democratic National Committee, and in the entire speech, his only reference to Ukraine and Russia was a reference that if only we had more green energy, it wouldn't be a problem. In the entire speech. And the whole speech was about global warming, where these people, frankly, I think really are the equivalent of religious fanatics.
Boy, oh boy. Newt, the cavalry's coming. I hope it gets here in time. That's all I can say. And I hope when it gets here, it's got an agenda like you put together way back in 1994. Anyway, thanks for coming on today. We appreciate it very, very much.